Amara was a woman who believed her life was perfect. Living in Lagos with her husband Chike, she felt safe, loved, and ready to welcome their first child. 9 months pregnant, she carried her joy like a crown, certain that nothing could break the bond they shared. But everything changed one night when her water suddenly broke. She called out to Chike, expecting him to rush to her side. Instead, his phone rang, and in a cold rush, he grabbed his suit. With barely a glance at her, he muttered, "I can't miss this wedding." Then he was gone. Not to help his wife. Not to stand beside her in the most important moment of their lives. But to attend the wedding of his billionaire boss's daughter, a woman the city whispered was more than just his boss's child, she was his secret lover. Alone, in pain, and terrified, Amara's scream filled the empty house. The walls shook with her heartbreak as she realized the truth. The man she trusted had abandoned her, not just as a husband, but as a father before he even held their child. That night, Amara's perfect life shattered into pieces she never thought she could gather again. Amara's cries of pain filled the small hospital room in Abuja as she brought her son into the world. There was no husband holding her hand, no comforting voice to whisper that everything would be fine. It was only her strength, and the tiny life she was fighting for. When she finally held her baby boy in her arms, tears rolled down her face, mixing with sweat. She named him Kelechi, meaning, "Thank God," because even in her deepest pain, she was grateful for the gift of her child. She whispered promises into his tiny ears, vowing never to let him feel abandoned the way she had been. But as she lay there, exhausted and broken, the outside world delivered another blow. Her phone buzzed with endless notifications. Curious nurses exchanged glances until one finally showed her the screen. There, splashed across every social media platform, were glossy photos of Chike. He wasn't rushing to her side, wasn't celebrating the birth of his son. Instead, he stood tall in an expensive suit at an extravagant wedding. The bride glowed beside him, draped in diamonds and silk. It was Folake, the daughter of his billionaire boss, Chief Adewale. The headlines were merciless: "The wedding of the century, Chike and Folake say, 'I do.'" At first Amara thought her tired eyes were playing tricks. Surely it was a cruel misunderstanding, maybe even a publicity stunt. But the truth was undeniable. The man who had promised her forever, the man she trusted with her life, had not only abandoned her in labor, he had married another woman on the very same night. Her heart cracked open in a way she never imagined possible. She remembered the whispers she had once brushed aside, the rumors of an affair between Chike and Folake. But she had defended him. She had believed in him. Now the betrayal stood in the open for the whole world to see. Chike had secretly signed marriage papers, leaving her and their newborn child in exchange for wealth, power, and a seat at the billionaire's table. The hospital room felt colder than ever. She stared at her baby, the only piece of love that remained real. People online were celebrating the glamour of Chike and Folake's union, but Amara's reality was the exact opposite: blood, sweat, and loneliness. While he danced under chandeliers, she rocked her baby under fluorescent lights. While cameras flashed on his smiling face, her tears went unnoticed. It was a betrayal beyond imagination. A betrayal that cut so deep, it could have destroyed her completely. But as she looked down at Kelechi's tiny fingers wrapped around hers, something shifted inside her. She realized that though Chike had abandoned them, she was not truly alone. She still had her child. She still had her strength. And deep inside, a new fire was born, one that would one day turn her heartbreak into a weapon and her pain into power. Amara left Abuja quietly, carrying her baby boy Kelechi in her arms and nothing else but pain in her chest. She chose Accra, a city where no one knew her story, where whispers of betrayal would not follow her. At first, life was unbearably hard. She had no husband to lean on, no family close by, and no one to share the weight of her broken heart. Days blurred into nights as she worked odd jobs to put food on the table. Sometimes it was teaching, sometimes it was helping in small shops. She saved every little coin, even if it meant going hungry herself, because she wanted a future for Kelechi that was brighter than her own past. But deep inside her, a seed her late father had once planted began to grow again. Years ago, he had spoken of a dream, a way to help African farmers sell their crops directly to the world without being cheated by middlemen. Amara remembered the way his eyes had lit up when he explained the idea, and she decided to bring it to life. Every night, after Kelechi fell asleep, she sat in front of an old laptop she had bought with borrowed money. She taught herself more about coding, business, and international trade. Her fingers typed through tears, her mind racing with ideas while her heart still carried the weight of betrayal. Some nights she felt like giving up, too tired and too alone to keep going. But then she would hear her baby cry, and she would hold him close, whispering, "We will not suffer forever. Mama will fight for you." That promise became her strength. Pain was no longer her weakness, it became her fuel. Slowly, she began to connect with people. She attended free seminars, reached out to investors on social media, and joined online groups where she could learn and share ideas. Many ignored her, some even laughed at her dreams, but she didn't stop. Each rejection only sharpened her determination. She believed that if her father's vision could live, then her son's future could also be secure. Over time, her idea began to take shape. She named it AgroLink Africa, a platform that would allow farmers from remote villages to connect directly with buyers around the world. No more middlemen taking everything, no more farmers working hard only to stay poor. She tested the idea with a few farmers outside Accra, and the results shocked even her. Crops that once sat unsold were now reaching markets abroad. Farmers who thought no one cared about them were suddenly receiving fair prices for their work. Word began to spread, and with each success story, her belief grew stronger. Amara was no longer the woman who cried alone in a hospital bed. She was becoming someone new, someone stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. Her heartbreak had not destroyed her. Instead, it lit a fire inside her that nothing and no one could put out. And though she still carried the scars of betrayal, she also carried hope, ambition, and a vision that was about to change not just her life, but the lives of millions. By the time Kelechi turned 3, Amara's life had completely changed. The sleepless nights, the long hours of work, and the countless rejections had finally begun to pay off. Her startup, AgroLink Africa, was no longer just a dream she worked on in the quiet corners of her small apartment. It had become a real company with farmers signing up every day. Investors who once ignored her now fought to be part of her vision. She traveled across Africa, meeting with rural farmers and showing them how technology could bring their crops to the world. Slowly, her idea grew into a movement, and soon, international doors opened. European and American firms started noticing her work. First, it was small contracts, but then the big deals came. She signed agreements with companies that wanted African produce, linking farmers directly to global markets. Money began to flow in, but more importantly, lives began to change. Farmers who once struggled to feed their families were now building homes, sending their children to school, and living with dignity. Everywhere Amara went, people spoke her name with respect. She became a symbol of hope, not just for women, but for anyone who had ever been broken and left behind. Within just 2 years, AgroLink Africa grew faster than anyone expected. The valuation skyrocketed, hitting $100 billion. Media houses around the world wrote about her. Magazines called her the Queen of African Agriculture. She appeared on global news channels, giving interviews about resilience, technology, and the power of believing in yourself. Amara became a self-made icon, celebrated from Accra to New York, from Lagos to London. But behind her glowing smile and powerful speeches, she carried a secret fire. While the world praised her for her strength and innovation, Amara never forgot the night she gave birth alone. She never forgot the man who left her in pain to chase wealth. Chike's betrayal was still carved into her heart, not as weakness anymore, but as a reminder of why she fought so hard. Every deal she signed, every investor she convinced, every farmer she helped, it all brought her closer to the moment she had been waiting for. She did not want revenge in the form of tears or anger. She wanted justice in the form of power. She wanted the man who abandoned her and her child to stand in front of her and realize that the woman he thought was disposable had risen higher than he could ever imagine. The same man who had chosen influence over love would one day have to bow to the empire she had built from nothing. So while the world celebrated Amara's rise, she prepared quietly for something greater. Her success was not only for herself or her son, but also for that moment of truth. The day she would finally confront Chike, not as the broken woman he left behind, but as the powerhouse she had become. When the news broke, it spread like wildfire. Chief Adewale, the billionaire who controlled half of Lagos, was hosting a grand renewal of vows ceremony for his daughter Folake and her husband, Chike. It was being called the wedding of the decade, the kind of event that would shut down streets, fill every magazine, and trend on every social media platform. The venue was already being decorated with gold, diamonds, and flowers flown in from Europe. It was no ordinary celebration. It was a show of wealth and power, meant to remind Nigeria that Chief Adewale's family ruled the social scene. Cameras would roll, journalists would cover every detail, and the entire country would watch live. The guest list was just as grand as the ceremony. Politicians, celebrities, top CEOs, and royalty from across Africa received invitations sealed with gold. Every elite family wanted to be seen there, dressed in their finest clothes, walking the red carpet. The world would not just witness a wedding. They would witness power. Among the long list of names, one invitation stood out. It was delivered to a penthouse in Accra, addressed to Amara. The woman Chike had once abandoned in her darkest hour, the woman he believed would never rise again, now received a personal invitation to sit among the powerful. But this time Amara was not the abandoned wife with empty hands. She was a billionaire in her own right, the force behind AgroLink Africa, the woman the world called unstoppable. When she opened the invitation, her lips curved into a calm smile. She read the words carefully: "You are cordially invited to the renewal of vows ceremony of Folake Adewale and Chike." For a long moment, she stared at the paper, remembering everything: the night she gave birth alone, the headlines that showed her husband marrying another woman, the endless tears she once cried. And then she folded the paper neatly and placed it on her desk. She did not need to ask why she was invited. Chief Adewale wanted to flaunt his power, and inviting her was his way of showing the world that she was nothing compared to them. But Amara was no longer the woman they thought she was. She had built an empire bigger than Chief Adewale's, stronger than the network of power Chike had abandoned her for. She saw the invitation not as an insult, but as an opportunity. For years, she had remained silent, working in the shadows, building her strength. Now, the perfect stage had been set, and the entire country would be watching. She held Kelechi close that night and whispered to him, "Soon, he will see what we have become." For the first time, the little boy's laughter did not remind her of loss but of victory. The wedding was not going to be the display of wealth Chief Adewale had planned. It was going to be the moment Amara ended her silence and showed the world who truly held the power. The golden ballroom glittered brighter than the sun that evening. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls of light, and the air was filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Guests in expensive gowns and sharp suits whispered about the sheer luxury of the event. Folake sparkled in her diamond-covered dress, standing proudly beside Chike, who raised his glass high, preparing to give a toast. Cameras were everywhere, recording every second of the spectacle for the nation to see. To the crowd, it was a night of love, wealth, and power. But none of them expected what was about to happen. The doors at the far end of the ballroom opened slowly, and the noise in the hall faded. All eyes turned toward the entrance. Amara stepped inside, dressed in a flowing emerald gown that shimmered like jewels under the golden lights. She did not need a crown or diamonds to announce her presence. Her calm, steady walk carried a weight that silenced the entire room. Every head turned. Every whisper stopped. She was no longer the forgotten woman from years ago. She was a queen walking into her court. Chike's face went pale the moment his eyes landed on her. His hand trembled so badly that his champagne glass nearly slipped. Memories of the night he abandoned her must have rushed back to him, colliding with the reality of who she had become. Folake, still smiling for the cameras, leaned close to him and hissed through her teeth, "What is she doing here?" Her jewels sparkled, but in that instant, her confidence cracked. The crowd gasped as Amara moved forward with grace, her emerald dress sweeping across the floor. No one dared to stop her. She looked straight at Chike and Folake, her eyes steady, her presence commanding more respect than all the glittering wealth in the room. When she finally stopped in front of them, the silence was so heavy that even the music had died. Then, with a calm voice that carried through the golden hall, Amara spoke. "Since you both love signing contracts so much," she said, her words sharp and clear, "I brought one of my own." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Some guests covered their mouths, others leaned closer, desperate not to miss a word. The cameras, still rolling, zoomed in on her face, capturing the moment that was about to change everything. Amara did not shout. She did not tremble. Her voice was calm, yet thunderous enough to shake the entire room. It was the voice of a woman who had been broken, abandoned, and forgotten, but who had risen higher than anyone dared to imagine. In that golden hall, under the gaze of Lagos's most powerful people, Amara turned what was meant to be Chike's grand celebration into her stage. The woman he once left behind had returned, not in tears, but in triumph. And the night was only just beginning. The silence in the golden ballroom was thick when Amara pulled out a sleek black folder from her bag. Every camera turned toward her, every guest held their breath. With steady hands, she walked past Chaik and Folake, who stood frozen, and stopped right in front of Chief Adewale. The billionaire who thought he owned the night stared at her with sharp, questioning eyes. Without a word, Amara handed him the documents. His fingers twitched as he opened them, scanning line after line. Within seconds, his confident smile collapsed. Whispers spread through the crowd like fire. People leaned over to one another, trying to guess what could shake a man as powerful as Chief Adewale. Then Amara spoke, her voice calm but cutting through the air like a blade. She explained that for months, quietly and without noise, AgroLink Africa had taken over his empire's biggest supplier contracts. The farmers, the goods, the transport, all now flowed through her company. She was no longer just a rival. She was the very foundation his empire stood on. If he wanted his billions to keep breathing, he needed her. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Some guests pulled out their phones, recording every second. Headlines were already being written in real time. Amara let the silence sink in before delivering the final blow. She announced a new partnership with major international boards, solidifying AgroLink Africa as the uncontested leader in global agricultural trade. In one swift move, she wasn't just standing beside Chief Adewale, she was standing above him. Folake's hand, covered in diamonds, began to shake as she clutched her champagne glass. The glitter on her dress suddenly looked cheap compared to the power radiating from Amara. Chaik's face drained of all color, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out. The man who once left her bleeding and crying in a hospital bed was now standing powerless before the woman he discarded. His betrayal had built the fire that turned her into this unstoppable force, and now the world was watching as he crumbled. Chief Adewale lowered the documents slowly, his hands trembling. He had thought this event would cement his family's dominance, but instead, it had become the stage for his humiliation. Around him, powerful politicians, business moguls, and celebrities whispered Amara's name, not his. The balance of power had shifted in an instant. Amara stood tall, her emerald gown glowing under the golden lights. She did not smile, she did not boast. She only looked straight at Chaik and Folake, her silence heavier than any insult. The man who thought she was disposable was now tied to her empire, his wealth depending on her decisions. In that moment, Folake's diamonds lost their shine, Chaik's pride turned to ash, and the entire ballroom erupted with whispers of the woman who had just flipped the world of the mighty upside down. The priest stood frozen at the altar, his hands clutching the book as if it could guide him through the chaos. But there were no words left to say. Chief Adewale, once so proud, stepped back, his face drained of color as whispers spread like wildfire. The cameras and phones in the room turned away from Folake's sparkling gown and Chaik's nervous smile and focused only on Amara. Every guest knew they were witnessing history, and none of them wanted to miss a second. Amara stood in the center of it all, her emerald gown glowing under the golden lights. At her side, little Kelechi held her hand tightly, his wide eyes watching the father he had never known. She looked straight at Chaik, her voice steady and sharp, cutting through the silence. "You left us to chase power," she said, every word echoing in the hushed hall. Then, with the calmness of a queen delivering judgment, she added, "Tonight, I bring you power, and I take it away." The word struck harder than any slap. Chaik lowered his gaze, unable to look her in the eye. Folake shifted uncomfortably, her jewels suddenly feeling heavy and meaningless. The ballroom, once filled with celebration, now reeked of shame and defeat. The wedding never finished. No vows were exchanged, no blessings spoken. Instead, it ended with broken deals, shattered pride, and the entire nation watching Amara rise higher than all of them. By the next morning, headlines weren't about the lavish ceremony or Folake's diamonds. Every front page carried Amara's name. The woman once abandoned in labor had turned betrayal into a $100 billion empire, and the world could not stop talking about her triumph.